Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things and welcome to another video, and today I'm here with my husband Nick and
Hello.
We're going to be talking about The Warden by Anthony Trollope. So Nick has just read The Warden by Anthony Trollope, which was his first Anthony Trollope book.
That's
this was
right.
your Victober pick this year. It's been a few years since I read The Warden, but we thought we would have a chat about it today. It'll be relatively spoilery, I think, so if you haven't read The Warden, maybe go away and read it and then come back.
It is a very short book.
It is a very short book, so it won't take you too long. But yeah, before we get into what you thought of The Warden, shall we talk a little bit about what the plot was about?
Yes!
Which I'm going to leave to you, because you've read it more recently than me.
This is a bit like a pop quiz, really, isn't it? So The Warden follows the story of Septimus Harding, who has been appointed warden of the charitable hospital attached to Barchester Cathedral. He's given this position by the bishop, and during the course of the novel, a young doctor who lives in Barchester by the name of John Bold challenges his right to draw an income of £800 a year from this charitable trust, while the actual beneficiaries can receive considerably less. So the plot follows on from there and follows Septimus Harding, his daughter Eleanor, various members of Barchester's clerical community, in particular the bishop and the archdeacon, and John Bold himself, as the repercussions of this challenge to Mr. Harding's right to this income reverberate through the community. And
it's all about sort of the moral dilemma that Septimus Harding finds himself in, and he finds himself kind of torn between slightly agreeing perhaps with John Bold and also with his son-in-law, Dr. Grantley's very different opinion on the position. And I should also say that The Warden is the first book in a series of interconnected novels, the Barchester Chronicles, and the second book in the Barchester Chronicles, Barchester Towers, is like a direct sequel to The Warden, and then the other books in the series are looser sequels and occasionally follow some of the characters but have sort of their own plot lines. So it's very short, but it is kind of an introduction to a series as well, which is slightly different, I suppose. So, what are your first thoughts then on your first Anthony Trollope book?
I don't want to say I'm disappointed, because I think that would sound like I enjoyed it less than I did. I really liked Trollope's writing style. I think he's actually very funny, and he's got a genius for naming people. I mean, Dr. Theophilus Grantley, Warden Septimus Harding, like they're fantastic names. I think what I thought with The Warden was it was a story with a tremendous amount of potential that's gone before it really gets going. I think it felt, and I'm not normally one to argue for books to be longer, but it felt much too short to tell the sort of grand tale of sort of a man battling with his conscience that it was actually trying to set up.
And I suppose as well, Anthony Trollope, like a lot of Victorian writers, is a bit tangential and a bit wordy and does like to go off on a tangent. So it's quite a short book, but also it's sort of even shorter in terms of what happens in it than the length of the book would suggest.
I mean, I believe there is an entire chapter discussing just the press of a particular paper, which they don't even go to. Like, genuinely, the whole chapter is about Mount Olympus, chapter 14, here we go, is about, like, the press of the Jupiter, which is one of the leading papers of the day, in Anthony Trollope's fictionalised version of England.
I expect that the Jupiter is based on a real paper, and it would have been a lot funnier if you were a Victorian, but I'm not certain about that.
But it's a whole chapter
I know.
where nothing relevant to the plot, nothing relevant to the plot occurs, but actually nothing occurs.
Oh.
It just describes the press, and Tom Towers, one of the people who works for the press.
I like Anthony Trollope, so I'm very fond of The Warden, but I'd read quite a few books by Anthony Trollope before The Warden, which I think probably helped. And also, I do often think like that The Warden isn't necessarily the best place to start with Anthony Trollope, or that if people start with The Warden, they should read The Warden and then Barchester Towers immediately afterwards, because Barchester Towers is a direct sequel, but also because I think it is a better book. Much as I'm fond of The Warden, I think Barchester Towers is sort of a fuller story with a lot kind of more interesting characterisation in a way, and Septimus Harding is a really interesting character, and I sort of love The Warden for him, but also he's in Barchester Towers, and so I don't know if I also, part of my love of the characters in The Warden comes from other books in the series as well.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked Septimus Harding. I thought Septimus Harding was a really interesting character, but we just see not a lot of him, really. I think his sort of journey from being secure in his position as warden, and it's almost like a classic tragedy, this little niggle gets into his brain and then he has to give up his position. That journey from comfortably secure in his position to feeling that he has to give it up for reasons of conscience is just incredibly rapid. I mean, I think time does pass, but Trollope doesn't establish the passing of time particularly strongly. But in terms of what we actually see of Septimus Harding, he's gone from sort of comfortable to doubting within like a chapter and a half, which feels very abrupt to me. And actually, I think it would be because the ending is really good, but it would be much more impactful if we'd actually suffered with Mr. Harding for a bit longer, I think, and watched him sort of battle with his conscience. And I think the central sort of actual plot is this legal claim against the warden, and it must be like halfway through it's established that it's not going to succeed, like it's not got a solid legal basis. But actually there was so much drama that you could have got out of that, which he just doesn't. And I just think so much time is given to things that don't really serve the story at all. So there's a bit towards the end, after Mr. Harding's decided to resign his position, where Dr. Grantley, who's the archdeacon and is the sort of principal force of upholding the church's rights to property, goes to see his lawyers for no particular reason, and they suggest that maybe Mr. Harding could have a different living. And Dr. Grantley is like, oh, that's a good idea. And then there's a good, like, several pages, I think, like certainly 15 minutes of the audiobook about Dr. Grantley going and making the arrangements for this living, and then it's just like, no, I don't want it.
But do you not think it's also like part of the point is Septimus Harding like trying to show his independence from his slightly overbearing son-in-law, Dr. Grantley? Like, I like this.
I agree, but I think he has a massive confrontation with Dr. Grantley where he wins, and I don't think we needed a coda to that where he does it again.
Maybe.
It doesn't really add anything at all, because I thought it was going to be like, oh, it's okay, the nice man still ends up not starving, but and obviously doesn't end up starving.
No. It has been quite a few years since I read The Warden, probably about 5, so I don't think I feel completely qualified to comment on the plotting. But there are a couple of things that I do really like about The Warden. One thing I do really like is the fact that it has quite an unusual plot. It's something I quite like in quite a lot of Trollope books, is that he looks at basically like kind of local politics, I suppose, more broadly, and kind of local issues like this, which I find quite fun. And obviously there is a little bit of a love story going on in The Warden, as there is in a lot of Victorian literature, but I like it when Trollope has a kind of more unusual premise, I suppose, to the book, and that's something I do really like about The Warden.
Yeah, I thought it was a fascinating setup. Like I say, I think one of the things that I've struggled with a little bit is I think the setup had so much potential that wasn't really used. Because I do think that like the idea of sort of, it's not even really church politics, it's just politics in general about the sort of assets of the Church of England and how those assets are deployed is a fascinating sort of hot political topic in the sort of mid to late-ish 19th century, in a way that obviously it is not really a charged topic now for most people. And I think that I found really, really interesting. I just think that we didn't really get the chance to explore it. And I think it's interesting because I think it's hard to tell, but I get the impression that Trollope thinks that in general John Bold is probably right, that Mr. is not sensible or is not appropriate for a trust that was set up to look after aged woolcarders, to pay a nominal amount to support of elderly people in the community and spend
a lot more to
support a church employee. But equally, Anthony Trollope as a writer is clearly very sympathetic to Mr. Harding, and he seems to be Trollope's favourite character, and he's for want of a sort of actual hero, he is the hero of the Warden, and he's also obviously the title character. And I think the point Trollope is making really is that John Bold is pursuing a noble end, but through inappropriate means. But again, I think John Bold sort of has a change of heart because one of the subplots is that he's in love with the Warden's daughter, who he ends up marrying, and because she appeals to him, he drops his suit, but isn't able to really stop the repercussions, sort of the publicity that he's drawn to Mr. Harding, and Mr. Harding sort of twinges of conscience. But that happens, I think, about halfway through the book. So actually John Bold is only the antagonistic force for quite a short period in the book. But I think it would be interesting to read a bit more about that, about a conflict where one side is in the right, if you like, but the damage that it's doing to a person in the wrong, but who's not really a bad person, is quite significant, and it's not really explored, I think.
I think it is explored a bit. I feel like that's what the book is about for me.
Well, I feel like it is, but I feel like we don't really get to see it for any significant length of time. There's no twists in the legal case. The legal case is brought. They get a legal opinion that says, it's not going anywhere, and then John Bold drops the legal case anyway, and that's it for the legal case. Yes, I think it's just there wasn't enough meat on the bones, I think, would be my feeling.
I'm still very fond of it.
I liked it. I'd definitely read some more Trollope. I thought that the political background is really interesting.
I think you'll like Barchester Towers more, because I think you'll find there's some characters in Barchester Towers who I think you'll really enjoy. And it is a lot about local politics and church politics, but it's longer, it's meatier, and there's more going on. And there's also more antagonists and more snideness in quite a fun way. So I think you'll like Barchester Towers a bit more. And Trollope is a great writer. Like, I think in general you'll really like Anthony Trollope the more you read of him. But maybe I haven't given you the best place to start.
He's very funny, and I don't want you to take away from this that I didn't enjoy The Warden. I did enjoy reading it, and I think.
Wanted more.
Well, I think I would say I was frustrated that Trollope presented me with a story that on paper is ideal. Like, it's the sort of thing I'd really, really love. And then he just sort of it's a bit like looking at the concept art for a film that I'd really, really like to watch. I think there's such a huge potential in that story, and it's just, you really can't afford to spend half a chapter describing gentlemen sort of not quite having the courage to go and approach ladies at what is a pretty incidental party, when you've only given yourself something like 15 chapters to tell your story.
It's like you've never read a Victorian book before. That's what Victorian literature is all about.
Well, no, but Dickens does that, but then Dickens just writes 800 pages, so it's fine.
Yeah, and Trollope does a lot of the time, to be fair. He's got many 1,000-page books, and I think The Warden is probably his shortest book, or one of his shortest books.
And I think it's just, it needed a good edit, I think is my feeling. But I did really enjoy it, and I enjoyed a lot of the digressions. They're very funny. They really tickled me, but I feel like it sucked a lot of the oxygen away from the actual story.
Another thing I do like about The Warden, which I wanted to mention, was like music and the way it explores music, and the fact that Septimus Harding loves music. I really enjoy that. That's something I think is really fun in The Warden, because that's something that isn't necessarily a feature of that many books of the period.
You'd be better qualified to judge that than me. I think I agree that he's often described as sort of playing an imaginary violin, which I really like, but also it doesn't feel like something that you'd have in a Victorian novel. It feels much more modern, which it felt really nice, and I really enjoyed it. I think the characters are all well drawn and believable, and I think that's the other thing, is that he has these really realistic characters, and then they change unrealistically abruptly, or they go through sort of their arcs unrealistically quickly, which I found difficult. And Eleanor, for instance, has this arc of like, she loves John Bold, but John Bold is hostile to her father, or at least is sort of opposed to her father's interests. And sort of she resolves that she'll beg him for her father's sort of, to spare her father this lawsuit, but if she does that, her pride means that she couldn't possibly marry him, because then it would seem like it was a transaction. But then she begs him, and then he says, will you marry me? And she basically says yes. Like, there's not really that's
there could be more tension, I suppose.
Well, I just think that's a great setup, isn't it? It's two people who love each other, but one of whom has asked the other for a favour, and so is unwilling to accept marriage. That's a really interesting dynamic for some interesting tension. Dickens could have got 2 books out of that, and it just is gone. It's gone before it's even there, I think.
Well, I'm very fond of The Warden. It's not like one of my absolute favourite Trollopes. There are definitely better Trollope books out there. And in fact, just even in terms of the Barchester Chronicles, I think it's probably my second least favourite out of the 6. but I do enjoy it, and I love it as well because I love the Barsetshire Chronicles a lot. So it's the first book in that series that I love. So I think there's a lot more books in that series that you'll really enjoy, and a lot of other Trollope books you'll enjoy as well. So more Trollope for you in the future, I think.
Yeah, I did enjoy it. I thought it was interesting. The writing was great. It definitely made me think that I'd like to read more Trollope in the future, but I'm not sure it's one that I would feel the need to reread.
Yeah. So in terms of Trollope's writing style, would you say you prefer to Dickens and Gaskell? Where would you rank Trollope in terms of writing?
Ooh. I don't know whether it's a question of prefer. I mean, I feel like it's a bit trite, but I feel like he sits somewhere between Dickens and Gaskell, in that Dickens is much more sort of flowery, for want of a better word, and also addresses the reader in a way that I don't think Gaskell does in North and South, does she? Maybe.
I don't think very much.
Maybe she does a little bit, but
does a lot in some books.
Well, I think the address to the reader was a really noticeable feature of The Warden.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe just because it's quite a short book, but it does feel like Trollope addresses the reader a lot in quite a Dickensian way.
Yeah.
But I feel like I think Trollope would probably be pleased for me to say that I think it's a lot more understated than Dickens.
Yes, I'm sure that would please Trollope very much.
I think his characters all have names that belong in a Dickens novel, but they act in ways that are more akin to a Gaskell novel.
I'm forgetting you've read some Thomas Hardy as well. You quite like Thomas Hardy, don't you?
I do quite like Thomas Hardy. Well, I think of the Thomas Hardys I've read, I thought Far From the Madding Crowd was really good, and Jude the Obscure was good until the end. I don't think I've read another Thomas Hardy.
No, I don't think so.
No, I think that's it. I've read quite a lot of his poetry, but I think I would say that Trollope is probably a funnier writer than Dickens. I think his humour is more in line with mine than Dickens.
I think that's true. Dickens is more silly, so that's why I love Dickens.
Dickens is more absurd, and Trollope is wry.
Yeah.
I think
you like the wry wit.
And I like the wry wit. I wouldn't say I prefer any of the styles. I'd say that Trollope was probably the most readable. He felt a bit less dense than Gaskell, and a bit less sort of. I think Dickens is so flowery that it's actually quite hard to penetrate him at first until you're into the book, whereas Trollope, it's straight away you're in. But I wouldn't say I prefer one style over another. I definitely liked Trollope's.
Good. Now on your journey with Victorian literature, we need to get you to read some Brontes.
Some Brontes,
yeah. That's probably the next
Probably finally read Wuthering Heights, shouldn't I?
Yeah, I think you might not like Wuthering Heights though.
That's fine. I
know it would be fun. We could have a very interesting video, and to be fair, Wuthering Heights is very divisive, so that might make quite a fun video.
I think I'll surprise you and love it.
Maybe. Well, I hope so. It's really weird, but I'm very fond of Wuthering Heights. So maybe that's next Victober's read.
Let us know down in the comments what next Victober's read should be.
Yeah, what should Nick read next? I think that's probably all we have to say for now.
I think so, yeah. It's quite a short book with a lot of interesting ideas, some of which might be borne out, I think.
And I really like it, but it has been many years since I've read it.
It's good. It is worth a read, and it doesn't take up a lot of your time. I think it would have benefited from being longer.
Well, at least you will get to revisit the characters in other books in the series. So there we go. And I think that's all for now. So let us know down in the comments if you've read The Warden and what you think of it. And we'll be back, well, I'll be back, probably without Nick, very soon for another bookish video.